Hello, welcome to my kitchen. I'm Greg Yanish. I'm going to be teaching you how to make some New York style pizza crust today. This recipe is a recipe that I've been working on for quite some time and somewhat refined. It's a proper New York style pizza crust, which means that it's a dense, chewy European style crust that's thin. Today most modern pizza crusts like Papa John's or Domino's are a very light, gooey, doughy crust that's more like bread. This is a dense European style Neapolitan type crust. All bread dough is made essentially of the same ingredients: flour, water, salt, and yeast. This particular recipe also includes some sugar, just a small amount, and a little bit of olive oil, which is unique to the pizza crust. A couple of specialty ingredients that are necessary for this recipe. This recipe calls for instant dry yeast, which is the blue jar. Make sure that it does say instant dry yeast. That's critical for this recipe. That is a different type of yeast than most people are used to working with. Also, I use King Arthur's bread flour, which is different than all-purpose flour. A bread flour is typically used for breads rather than just standard baking. So that's what I recommend, and that's what I use in this particular recipe. Some of the kitchen tools that we're going to be using. Everybody should have a digital kitchen scale. I use a dough knife, which could be even a spatula or just a large knife. I have a half a teaspoon here, a full teaspoon, and a mixer. With the mixer, you're going to want your dough hook to make the dough. You get that set up. Have your bowl in the lower position so that you can access the ingredients, and we'll raise that up once we start mixing. Get all your ingredients out. This is a nice recipe. It just seems somewhat daunting to make in that it's an all-day process. Once you have your ingredients in containers and they're all set up, really this is something you can come home from work, do in about 15 minutes, have dough ready to put in the fridge. One of the unique steps of this particular recipe is that the dough is placed in what's called a cold fermentation. Dough needs to rise and ferment on a certain timeline whenever you make a bread product. This particular recipe calls for a cold fermentation, which reproduces what they do in the New York City restaurants or any busy pizzeria. The dough is made, shoved into the fridge, and it's let rise in the fridge for 2 days. That does something unique with this particular recipe in that it allows the yeast to break down the carbohydrates in the dough at a slower process, giving it that European dense, chewy flavor. The dough is a wonderful dough, and I hope you enjoy this recipe. We'll get started with the dough making now. Get the mixer in place, and we'll start off with preparing the dry ingredients. When you get your kitchen scale out, get that ready, there's usually a tare button on the scale. So turn your scale on, and it'll have an on and off switch. On the bottom of this particular scale, there's a battery compartment, and a plastic tab needs to be pulled out to actually activate the batteries. Once you've got it on, and you've got whatever bowl you're going to be using for your dry ingredients, place that on the scale. Make sure that your units are set to grams, and tare the scale, which means reset everything to 0 so that the scale sees this bowl as part of itself and won't weigh the bowl itself. If you want to use a larger kitchen item, you can place that on the scale, re-tare, and it will consider that starting from 0. So we'll get the mixing bowl on there, re-tare down to 0. This particular scale also gives you a measurement of the room temperature. Now refer to your recipe card that I've given you, and we're going to be weighing the ingredients here. This is one very key process into making reproducible good dough or bread products. Proper baking is done with weighing your ingredients, not measuring with cups. A cup of flour is a variable entity. So many ounces or grams of flour is reproducible. So a cup, if the flour is densely compact, will be several different volumes based on how much flour you can pack into that cup. So therefore it's not reproducible. The best way to do it is to weigh. So we're going to measure using grams. The first ingredient is flour at 779 grams. So we'll get that going here. This allows you to be very precise, right on the money. 779, there it is. I go ahead and assemble all of the dry ingredients into the mixing bowl ahead of time. Mix those dry ingredients up, and then we'll mix them into the water. Secondly, we're going to use our yeast. Refer to your recipe card, and this recipe calls for 1 teaspoon of instant dry yeast. The next ingredient we're going to use is salt. This recipe calls for 2.5 teaspoons of salt. I don't weigh the smaller ingredients, and that a teaspoon or a half a teaspoon of salt is fairly easy to reproduce. I also use sea salt for this particular recipe, but it doesn't necessarily matter. The sugar is an optional item. I tend to use 1 teaspoon of sugar. The recipe calls for up to 2 teaspoons. It does change the dough quite a bit based on how much sugar you use. Now that we've got all of the dry ingredients in here, I'm going to mix them up with a soft spatula. Just gently mix some of these dry ingredients up. The next item we're going to need is our water. This recipe calls for 514.5 milliliters of water, which is just short under 2 1/4 cups. You might say, well, how do I know if I have 514 milliliters of water? Well, 1 mil or 1 cubic centimeter of water equals 1 gram. So if you don't have a precise measuring cup, you can tare your measuring cup on your scale and then add water to it until you have 514 grams. Now that we've got all the dry ingredients mixed up and ready to go, we need to get the water into the mixing bowl first. I am going to show you how to prepare your water so you get the right amount, and again, these ingredients and proportions are quite important. So hit the tare button on your scale. Get the measuring cup that you want to use or to pour into the bowl set to go. Hit your tare button so that it all thinks it's 1 unit, and then you can add your water until you get to 514 grams. Additionally, I check the temperature of that water to make sure that it's about 80 degrees, which it is. And if not, you can heat it in the microwave just a little bit to get it to the proper temperature. The water goes into the mixing bowl first. This is also a critical step in this particular recipe. It just makes the dough come together a little bit better. Raise up the dough bowl, and we'll start the mixer on low. We're going to add the dry ingredients to the bowl. Alright, we'll kick that up just a notch. As that's starting to mix in, we still need to add our olive oil, but I like to get all the dry ingredients wet before we add the oil, or at least near so. Alright, as you can see, the dough is ready for the olive oil. It's mostly absorbed the water and is hydrated. I like to kind of spread that around the edge, and we'll add 3 total teaspoons. Then we'll put the mixer on a medium setting, and we'll do that for between 8 to 10 minutes. And we'll set a kitchen timer to do so. There is a kitchen timer on the digital scale, or you can set the timer on your oven. We'll let that go for 8 minutes and come back and check it. Okay, our dough is mixing. We're going for about 8 minutes. While your dough is being made, some spray olive oil or some of the olive oil that you had from before you're going to need 4 separate dough containers. This recipe yields 7 balls of dough. I found at home it works best if you use these Tupperware containers. I can get 2 go balls in each one of these, so I just spray a little olive oil on the bottom. Be fairly generous with that, and kind of onto the sides. And then I take the paper towel and just kind of wipe that down and spread it all around. We're a little over halfway through mixing of the dough, and this is how it typically looks with 4 minutes to go. Gently get it out of the bowl. Now, one thing we're going to do is we're going to separate this into 7 doughs of 7 balls. So again, here's where a nice place we can use our kitchen scale to be somewhat exact and reproducible so that you get 7 equal sizes of dough. We'll measure that in grams, make sure you're set to the grams and you're tiered with the bowl on. Place the ball of dough in. You can use your calculator on your cell phone. It should weigh 1320 divided by 7 equals 189 grams for each ball of dough. So 189, okay? So we'll put our dough down on the counter with just a tiny bit of flour. You don't want to dry this out with a whole bunch of flour, okay? And then try to do your best at just guessing what the balls of dough should be. I'm a little high there, so we'll take some off of that. All right, 190, close enough. So now you have a ball of dough, and we'll separate this into 7 segments. But the next most important thing to do is that you can't just put this in the Tupperware container as it is. You've got to form the ball of dough so that it rises uniformly and it's a circular product. To do that, you're going to do what's called pinching down the dough. You're going to push into the center and fold it over and continue to push it into the center and fold it over so that you're enveloping it around itself, creating a nice round surface on the outside. So you push in, roll it around, spin it, push in, roll it around, spin it, push in, roll around, spin it. And so you're going to keep doing that until you pinch the dough down and it's making a nice round surface on the outside, and you're trying to make a little globe of dough, like so. We'll put that straight into the Tupperware container that we had prepared earlier. You want to take those, cover them up, and put them straight into the refrigerator when you're done with your dough today. We don't do a countertop rise, we just let it go straight into the fridge, and a minimum of 2 days, between 2 and 5 days is the best. This will yield 7 balls of dough, as I said. I hope you enjoyed this. We'll make another video on how to actually assemble the pizza and properly stretch out this dough.